Guess what? The US may have just caught another CCP spy. YouTube is finally taking on Chinese influence campaigns, and the EU is sanctioning Beijing over supporting Russia's war. Then more on this week's China News Headlines. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. For a while now, I've been telling you about YouTube's censorship of our channel and others critical of the Chinese Communist Party, all while they promote pro-CCP channels. Well, that's changed. Not the censorship of the show. China Uncensored still doesn't autocomplete in the search bar. But YouTube has wiped out thousands of propaganda channels linked to China, Russia, and other countries. On Monday, Google announced the removal of nearly 11,000 YouTube channels and other accounts tied to state-linked propaganda campaigns, including 7,700 CCP-linked YouTube channels. Ooh, I'm gonna need to schedule a visit with my dentist because I might get a cavity over how sweet this is. But those are just the accounts they've removed in their second quarter. Google's threat analysis group also deleted more than 23,000 YouTube channels in the first quarter, of which more than 15,000 were related to China. Hopefully this means YouTube has changed its colors, and the algorithm will stop suppressing our channel and others like it. The beautiful, gorgeous, all-wise algorithm that I'm not trying to butter up at all. Severe storms have hit southern China in the wake of Typhoon Wifa. And when I say severe, I mean severe. Hong Kong issued its highest storm warning as the typhoon approached, a T10, although it was later downgraded to a mere T8. The typhoon swept in from the sea and dramatically made landfall in Guangdong, pounding the area with heavy rain and some pretty crazy wind. I hope this guy ended up okay. Chinese media is warning of floods, landslides, and downed trees, and advising the public to be vigilant. Hopefully, top communist officials don't choose to redirect floodwaters from major cities to where the poors live, like they've done in the past. Speaking of people getting screwed, yes, that's the transition I went with. Great British Energy solar panels actually were made in China, following the age-old British imperial tradition of taking things from other countries and passing it off as their own. Give back the Parthenon marbles already. Great British Energy is a state-owned company set up by the Labour government to invest in renewable energy like solar panels. And being a government company funded by taxpayer dollars, it went with the cheapest option, buying from China. Same reason anyone eats McDoubles. It's not the only one. In fact, last year, 68% of the solar panels imported by the UK came from China, compared to 61% in 2023. Which is problematic for a few reasons. First, the UK's Modern Slavery Act of 2015. It requires businesses to submit a report each fiscal year showing that its supply chains and products do not rely on forced labor. And when China's involved, that's like trying to guarantee a McDouble wasn't made without harming cows. Was I hungry when I wrote this? You bet. See, the thing is, solar panels are made with polysilicon. And up to 50% of the world's supply of polysilicon comes from Xinjiang, with well-documented links between the solar sector and Uyghur slave labor. Essentially, if you want to go green, you got to ignore the red from all the blood on your hands. A spokesperson for Great British Energy said it would lead the way in ethical supply chains, and insisted there was no place for forced labor or unethical practices in the UK's energy transition. So, that's a lie? And now we have a bombshell from Kari Lake, the senior advisor to the U.S. Agency for Global Media. She says that Voice of America managers met with Chinese officials to discuss more favorable coverage for Beijing. I guess they didn't get the memo from YouTube and Google. This is bound to stir up a storm, and not just because Kari Lake is a controversial figure whose name sounds like the waspiest body of water in Massachusetts. Many U.S. officials, activists, and even media outlets believe that the Trump administration's targeting of VOA would only help authoritarian actors like Russia and China spread their propaganda worldwide. But it appears that China, at least, had some say over how VOA was covering them. Never underestimate the sheer scale of stupid. On Tuesday night, Lake gave an interview to Just the News, No Noise.
And we found out in our investigations over the months that I've been here that the CCP operating out of the embassy in Washington, D.C., the Chinese embassy, were meeting regularly with VOA management to tell them how they should be covering China.
If you want to know how you should be covering China, I've got about 2,300 episodes on this channel you can use as an example. Lake also claimed that at least one VOA official with the Mandarin language edition voiced support for the CCP, and that some VOA managers even flew to China to meet officials there. If you want a free vacation, instead of cozying up to authoritarians, try going on The Price is Right. And remember to spay and neuter your pets. She also said that from 2009 until the end of the Biden administration, VOA used J-1 cultural exchange visas, which are not work visas, to bring hundreds of foreign employees to the U.S. to work for VOA, including over 100 from countries that pose national security concerns to the U.S. Because surely, those are the best people to tell America's story and combat hostile propaganda. And it included at least 3 employees from China who once worked with CCP-linked and state-owned media outlets. That would be like wanting to hide your affair by going to a Coldplay concert. Topical. This is entirely contrary to what VOA supposedly stands for, and why it was formed after World War II. Lake confirmed that VOA is ending the J-1 visa program, and that the White House is working hard to reduce its workforce and eventually shutter the agency altogether. Maybe they can replace VOA with a more reputable source. I can think of a few off the top of my head. And after the break, the EU is sanctioning China. Welcome back. The EU is sanctioning 2 Chinese banks over aid to Russia. That's right, the European Union has moved beyond holding talks with China and is now imposing sanctions. Hey, a step in the right direction. China and the EU have been having some difficulties lately, mainly on trade, and the CCP's support for Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Did I say support? I meant obvious successful mediating. Hence the sanctions. China's Minister of Commerce complained about the measures during talks with the EU trade chief on Tuesday, while EU bosses Antonio Costa and Ursula von der Leyen went to Beijing yesterday for talks on the war and trade. Yeah, maybe I spoke too soon about that step in the right direction. I don't expect much to come from that meeting for some reason, and that some reason being countless historical examples. The U.S. Department of Agriculture has fired foreign workers from adversarial countries, including China, in a national security protection move, which is way overdue if you ask me, which you subtextually did by watching this video, so I'm telling you, way overdue. The cuts impacted 70 contract workers, including some from China, Iran, Russia, and even North Korea. The workers were with the ARS, or Agricultural Research Service, which does research on areas important to farmers, such as pests, climate change, and food safety. The firings are part of a new move by the Trump administration to crack down on Chinese-affiliated entities owning American farmland, especially near military bases. Even way overdue, I say. Speaking of stories that are repeated over and over, you're probably getting sick of, another Chinese spy was caught. An engineer is pleading guilty to stealing trade secret technology designed for missile launch and detection for the Chinese government's behalf. The man is 59-year-old Cheng Guanggong of San Jose, California, and he's a dual Chinese-U.S. national. According to his plea agreement, Gong transferred more than 3,600 files from an LA-based R&D company that briefly employed him as a designer of infrared sensors. Some of the files were discovered and seized during a raid on his apartment. The files include blueprints for advanced infrared sensors that can detect nuclear missile launches and track ballistic or hypersonic missiles along with other advanced weapons. Gong was fired in April of 2023, but kept downloading over 1,800 more files after he accepted another job at a rival company, which goes to show how important cybersecurity is, which is why we use... What's that, Shelley? Oh, we don't have a cybersecurity sponsor this week. Well, I don't have anything specific to plug here, but make sure your stuff is safe. Many of these files contain trade secrets and were marked as for official use only or export controlled. But it gets worse. According to the investigation into Gong, law enforcement found that between 2014 and 2022, while being employed with many American tech companies, Gong also submitted many applications to Chinese talent programs. Sounds like he was applying for the worst game show of all time. China's Got America's Talent. And in a 2019 email that was translated from Chinese, Gong remarked that he took a risk by traveling to China to participate in the talent programs because he worked for an American military industry company and thought he could do something to contribute to China's high-end military integrated circuits. Well, it turns out one of his talents wasn't being discreet. He was as good at keeping things on the DL as Astronomer's ex-CEO. Still topical. Gong will be sentenced in the fall and faces a maximum penalty of a decade in prison. For now, he's free on a $1.75 million bond. Man, that could have gotten him so many McDoubles. I think it's time for lunch, which I can't afford without your support. If you really want to become a China expert, click on this button and check out all the deep dives we have exclusively on our website, chinauncensored.tv. It's just the price of a bag of coffee, which I'll probably drink instead of eating lunch so I can keep working. Covering China has not been good for my health. Click the button. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.